I am absolutely appalled and literally horrified we left Americans there. One administration official told Politico it was a hostage rescue of thousands of Americans in the guise of an NEO, non-combatant evacuation operation, and we have failed that no-fail mission. Another White House official said that the mission isn't accomplished if they had left Americans behind. You are the leader of the House GOP, one of the two leaders of the Republican Party in office right now. What is your message to the party in a nonpartisan moment of defeat and retreat and crisis?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me. It's been a tragic couple weeks. My first message, not just to the party, but to the nation. We have 13 more Gold Star families. We have thousands upon women and men who have served us for the last 20 years in Afghanistan. My first message is to them. Job well done. You did exactly what we asked. You kept us safe for the last 20 years. The decision, what took place within the last month, solely rests on the Biden administration. We now find from this article that they don't support it either. You know, to be a successful president, you have to have the faith, the trust, and the confidence of the American public. I think this president of this last month has lost that in so many different ways. But what we need to do right now and focus, I just came back from DC yesterday. I was on the floor hoping, because we had what is called pro forma, that we can take action. We tried this a couple weeks before and the Democrats voted against us. Just 4 simple things that we should focus on. We have a Congressman, Mike Gallagher, who offered the bill. First of all, President Biden early on, just on the 19th, said, the mission will not end until every American comes home. Well, that didn't hold true. Earlier in the month, they said there were somewhere between 11,000 to 15,000 Americans, and they tells us they got 5,600 out. But somehow that math equals up to less than 200. What is your plan if you knowingly left by leaving Americans? What is your plan to get all Americans out? That should be everybody's mission. Secondly, what is the accounting of the amount of weaponry we have left the Taliban? We know they now have an air force bigger than 1/3 of every NATO country. As O'Brien likes to say, more Black Hawks than Australia. And they're going to utilize these, or they're going to sell them to our adversaries. Next is no cash for the Taliban. And very last, the big concern that we have, we should not recognize the Taliban. But that's a different thing that I've been hearing. Those 4 items, not just to the Republicans, but to the nation, we should all have answers to and we should all focus on. There's a lot of other things we're going to have to focus on. But as a nation, how are we going to live with ourselves by knowingly have an administration leave Americans behind? And it's not that Americans didn't want to leave. I can tell you, and young Kim can tell you, and every single member, we were working day and night, even yesterday, even today, where people were going to the airport because the State Department told them to and left them. Telling the president told the Americans to go down there. I have report after report as they went down there, the Taliban shot at them, tore their papers, and they'd run for safety. It wasn't a free trip to get into there. And as a nation, our reputation, we're going to have to rebuild around the world. It's not just what happens next week, it's for the next decades the damage that has been done just in the last month alone.
So, Mr. Leader, in the last 3 weeks on my radio show, I've hosted everyone, literally everyone of significance in the party, from former President Trump to Liz Cheney, to all the veterans you mentioned, Mike Gallagher and Dan Crenshaw and Michael Waltz and many others, Jim Banks, to Senator Leader McConnell and Bill Hagerty, who was an ambassador at the same time, Ambassador O'Brien with the Department of State. All of them said that the Doha Agreement did not oblige the United States to exit in this fashion. nor did it oblige us. There were conditions attached. How does Congress establish what happened and the interplay between the 19 and a half years of war that went before this and the end game so catastrophically executed by the Biden administration?
We have three co-equal branches. Congress has oversight. What Congress needs to be doing right now, first get the Americans out, but the oversight. I've had our 3 committees of jurisdiction send a letter to preserve all that information. We need people before us. Why were these decisions made? The other thing, as being part of the Gang of 8, we get intel. I went to the agencies beforehand because I didn't believe, as I said before, President of Afghanistan, that they were going to be able to sustain themselves a month prior from everything I was hearing. I believe the president got intel, same intel that I got. But he made a knowing decision. When he closed Bagram, which was never President Trump's plan, you had 2 runways, but more importantly, you had more than 5,000 prisoners, a lot of the ISIS-K sitting there. And you left in the middle of the night without telling your allies. And what happened was, how we were being successful there, because the last 18 months there was no casualties, but the number of American troops was very small. Air power. But when you take the air power away, the Afghan military, or they believe that they're going to be able to win, even though they're losing thousands of casualties. And for the president to blame them, he's blamed everyone but himself, even though he said the buck stopped there. He curtailed the military by telling the military the number of troops they could have. So they had to close Bagram, but they closed it before the Americans were to leave. When you go through this library and you study Vietnam, when President Nixon went in, there's 550,000 American troops there. And the drawdown and the conditions. And when they broke the conditions, they bombed them. I watched the past administration, when conditions were broken, you cut it off, you punished them. So they learned not to do it, that no American died. This was a much different. This new policy with this President Biden is like a weak man theory. He's already given in to Putin, given him Nord Stream 2 and got nothing for it. He gave in to China. He gives in to the Taliban, hoping that later I'm going to build a relationship to get something. It goes against every doctrine America has ever had. Peace through strength. We've understood this and we've been successful by that. It's the complete opposite. And they've watched what has happened in this administration. They found the window and the opportunity. And it's put as an embarrassment on the world stage.
Ambassador O'Brien, President Trump, former President Trump, former Secretary of State Pompeo, and you have all said on the air to me in the last 2 weeks, the Doha Agreement did not oblige us to conduct ourselves in this fashion. And the former president said to me, O'Brien was the envoy for hostage affairs. I brought home 55 Americans. I would never have left Americans. Can you expand on what the conversation with the Taliban leader was that the president had, which I believe you were on along with Secretary of State Pompeo, and what his attitude would have been towards leaving Americans behind?
Well, I can tell you the first thing, Hugh, and thank you for that question. And first, I want to join the leader in expressing our condolences to the families of the soldier, sailor, and the Marines who were lost. I think a lot of the Marines came from Camp Pendleton, just down the road from here. They're great Americans and fallen heroes. And the toughest thing you have to do as the President of the United States or as the National Security Advisor when you join the President or represent him is to go to Dover for those dignified transfers of our fallen heroes and bring them home. And so that was, and I went, I think, half a dozen times, never in a situation where we had 13 Americans coming home, as we saw in those pictures. And so our hearts and our prayers go out to the families of the fallen, and God bless them. And that goes for all the folks that served us, and especially those who lost life and limb and their families in Afghanistan over the past 20 years. And I agree with the speaker to be, the minority leader, that they did great work for the United States of America, and they deserve our gratitude and our thanks. And we don't want another situation like happened with Vietnam, where our veterans, it took years for our veterans to be recognized for their sacrifice, and we need to recognize them now. So let me start with that. Let me go talk briefly about the issue. Number one, the president believed in America first. And what that really meant, people didn't understand what America first meant to the president. That meant putting the American people first. So my first job in the administration was as a presidential envoy for hostage affairs. And that was going out to get folks like Pastor Brunson and Danny Birch and others Zhizhao Wang, who was in Iran, going around the world to try and get Americans who were either wrongfully detained by foreign governments or who were held hostage by terrorist organizations and bringing them home. And we did it without paying ransom. We did it by employing our military, and we did it through very tough negotiations. I'm very concerned that my predecessor is a good man, Roger Carson's, Ambassador Carson's. He may be in a situation, Hugh and Kevin, where he's got hundreds of Americans that he has to get back. And he's going to lack leverage in those negotiations because we don't have Bagram. I mean, President Trump would have never shut Bagram. And if he ever did, it would have been the last thing he shut down. He would have bombed it to make sure it wasn't useful to the Chinese or the Russians or anyone else. But we've got very little leverage now to negotiate with the Taliban or ISIS, whoever takes these or holds these Americans. And so Roger's going to have a tough road to hoe, and we're going to have to keep him and the administration and everyone in our prayers who's trying to bring those Americans home. But they've left a very difficult situation for us. President Trump made it very clear in the Oval Office on numerous occasions, to General Milley, to myself, to others, no Saigon-style withdrawal from Afghanistan. President Trump wanted to get out of Afghanistan. We wanted to pivot to China, the existential threat to our country. But we wanted to get out of Afghanistan with honor and dignity. So no Saigon-style departure, and unfortunately that's what we had. No Americans left behind. No Afghan interpreters or other enablers left behind. And this really bothered the president. No American military equipment left behind. I mean, the Taliban may not be able to operate this equipment, but the Iranians can. And the Iranians are going to come in for the biggest used car sale and used helicopter sale and used combat aircraft sale in human history. And we're going to equip the Iranian army, for the next 2 decades with what we left behind in Afghanistan. Those were all things that President Trump said can't happen as part of a withdrawal. So, we're in an unfortunate situation now. We've got to really pray for the Americans, and that's mission number one. And then we can talk about this later. We've got to think about how do we rebuild American credibility around the world for our allies like Israel, Poland, Taiwan, that are on the front lines of freedom. And now there's a doubt in those countries, our friends, but also a doubt among our adversaries and our foes about how strong America will be in coming to the defense of our allies. So we've got a serious credibility issue that we have to address very quickly.
And okay, we've woken up today, September 1st. President Biden, even when our allies, and think about it, France, Great Britain, Germany, is asking the president to extend this deadline. Why are they even there? Because America was bombed. Because America was attacked 20 years ago, they're risking their own lives to defend us. He chose the Taliban over them and kept the 31st. So now we wake up on the 1st. You listened to the president last night. The question I have for him, one question: what is the plan to bring Americans home? You knowingly made the decision to leave them there, but you still have not given us a plan to bring them home. So why would you ever make the decision to leave until you had them home? That's what I don't understand from the president.
Leader, on Monday, I sought out Daniel Runde from the Center for Strategic International Studies, an Afghan expert, to talk about the refugee issue and how we process refugees. I then got an Uber back to my home in Virginia, driven by an SIV young man from Afghanistan, 29 years old, brought his wife out under an SIV. It took him 6 months to get his Army colonel to vouch for him and the Floor Corporation for whom he had worked. His sister had been in colleges in hiding. His brother is in hiding. There are SIV and SIV relatives all over Afghanistan, and they're also in transit. I hope the GOP is welcoming after vetting of these refugees, but what is your advice to your colleagues about those SIVs who are still in Afghanistan and those who are in transit around the world, assuming, of course, that people are vetted, which it is possible to do given their service with America?
You can vet. We keep our promises. They risked their lives, they fought with us. We promised we'd take them. We're going to take them. Need to be vetted because in the way that the Biden administration left, a lot of people at the very beginning weren't the SIVs. There were people who never helped us, who were getting out. You need to take them, what people call the lily pad of the place, and vet through. But we have a number of people who were Americans, who had a family or Afghan, and the State Department were not allowing them all to come together. You had a choice. You can come, but you're going to leave your children and your wife? No, you wouldn't make that decision. That held up a great deal. But now we have, if there's something that shows it bigger than anything, when Joe Biden was there in 2008 and needed to be saved and had an interpreter, that interpreter is still over there. No powerful message, and you promised me you'd bring me.
I have one question for you both, and then looking forward. You are a group of 8. To what extent in the course from March, April, May forward, did the administration keep you and Leader McConnell, as well as Democrats, acutely and up-to-date informed on the conditions on the ground? Did they treat the Congress as a co-equal participant in the conclusion of the 20-year war?
I never remember one Gang of 8 meeting on it in the 7 months he's been there. I remember having a conversation, Leader McConnell and I, with Blinken, only because we were at the White House for a dinner for Merkel, that we engaged him about our concerns of what were happening, getting the individuals out earlier. Is there legislation that needs to be done? Because we don't believe you can do it. And we were getting the answers that now true to be wasn't true, that it could sustain itself. We had President Ghani before us in a meeting, the leaders in the House, and my question to him was, I'm watching the Taliban encircle the provinces. I've watched one already fall. How can you sustain yourself? He gave this answer of how they're going to be able to fight back even though they weren't winning then. Now we're getting reports that it could be true that President Biden pressured him to give a false impression that could have been giving members of Congress a false impression, because that's the time he was in the White House, in Washington. And this is where conditions matter.
Yeah.
For the president to say he would have done nothing different, why wouldn't you have changed it when these cities were collapsing? Why wouldn't you bombed? Why wouldn't you have gotten our military equipment out? Why wouldn't you keep Bagram open and get all the Americans out, then close it?
The pressure will be on you and the Republicans to go along with turning the page and look forward, but oversight has to be done while people's memories are fresh. How will you get these answers? Which committees will get them?
You have 3 major committees: Foreign Affairs, the Intel Committee, and Armed Services. But I want you to put in that this decision by the Biden administration goes back a couple years. Remember what they did when they made Adam Schiff in charge of the Intel Committee. The Intel Committee oversees all the agencies. Also, as the co-equal branch is looking around the world to our challenges of what we're supposed to fund. He made it a political committee. He focused just on impeachment. What committee is on today? He's focused on September 6th, he and the Homeland Security Chairman, when we have now an open border, when we have already picked up 2 people that are publicly reported.
I believe you meant January 6th.
The January 6th. Oh, what did I say?
Yeah, you got the date.
Oh, okay. They kept their eye off the ball. If we're a co-equal branch, why weren't they there warning the administration that they can't go through with this? Because they were only focused on politics. So, those 3 ranking members have already put forth letters to preserve all the information. We're already calling for the hearings. But more importantly, why we have greater strength, all those people you just mentioned that have been on your show, we have a lot of veterans who have served, from Navy SEAL Dan Crenshaw to Intel collectors and others. The more committees we have eyes and ears that understand the real answers, this is where the information will come from, and this is where the corrections will take and the solutions will be.
And Ambassador O'Brien, I understand the administration's desire to minimize the number of Americans left behind, but not in all the years you were special envoy did you ever tell me, and we're pretty good friends, that green card status mattered in getting an American resident back, or dual citizenship mattered. They're using that as an attempt.
No.
And when you were the hostage envoy, do these niceties matter, or do Americans count as Americans?
No, look, if an American was overseas and held hostage, we didn't care how they got there. Some of them did some things that you wouldn't have advised doing, hiking in Iran or hiking in Afghanistan. And you kind of, question that. It didn't matter. Once they were taken hostage, and if they were taken hostage because they were an American or they were wrongfully detained because they were American, we didn't care how they got to that country. We didn't care what their politics were. We didn't care what their race or religion was. Our job was, an American was in harm's way, our job was to go get them home. Never once did the president ask me how they got there or who they are or what they believe in. It was, there's an American that's in need of assistance, go bring them back home. And
before I ask the leader about how to repair it, would you give the Cook's tour of the damage done to America vis-a-vis our adversaries, and indeed to the idea that if you're an American, you will not be left behind? Even the people in the embassy in Tehran for 1.5 years under President Carter never thought we gave up on them. How do you,
No,
what's the damage and what does the leader have to work on?
You know, who would have thought that we'd be looking back at the Carter years as the good old days? You know, but look, we saw what happened, and as the leader and I, as Kevin and I walked through the library, and we looked at the images of Vietnam and the end in Saigon. We went through a very rough 4 years after that. Nicaragua fell, Grenada fell, Mozambique, Angola, Zimbabwe, the Soviets invaded Afghanistan. It was a very bleak period of time. Our hostages were taken in Iran. We suffered through 4 very tough years because of the lack of credibility, the lack of a projection of a peace through strength posture to the world. And weakness is provocative. Even the perception of weakness in international affairs is provocative. And it encourages our adversaries to take actions thinking that they can get away with something because America is no longer watching, America is not on the beat, America is no longer engaged. And so, you know, what John Radcliffe, your former colleague, and my colleague in the Trump administration and I did when we were up with the leader in Jackson Hole about a week and a half ago, we put out an op-ed and said, here are the things we need to do to immediately help restore American credibility. We can't wait 4 years for President Trump to come back, or Governor DeSantis, or Secretary Pompeo, or Senator Cotton to be elected president. We have to do things now as a country. And you know, one is we have to speed our arms sales deliveries to Taiwan. Taiwan has bought arms from us. They've been approved. We need to put them at the top of the list, the customer list for the defense manufacturers. We need the administration needs to go to the Raytheons and Lockheeds and others and say, put them at the top of the list and deliver those arms immediately, so that we can send a message to the Chinese, don't bully Taiwan, they can defend themselves. Poland wants 250 M1A1 Abrams tanks. It'll take a few years for those to get built in Lima, Ohio. Those are great jobs for Americans in Ohio and your home state. But while those tanks are getting built, let's send them 250 tanks out of our depot. We've decommissioned a bunch of our armored cav units. Let's send those tanks and get them to Poland immediately. Let's start sending a message out. Let's finish the Compact of Free Association of States with our friends in the Marshall Islands and Palau in the Pacific. Let's recognize Somaliland in Africa, which has stood up to the Chinese and is taking refugees from Afghanistan. So there are a bunch of things that we can do that wouldn't cost a lot of money. Putting a Coast Guard cutter in American Samoa. You know, our Democrat friends, and God bless them, they like to talk about protecting Asian Americans and protecting Pacific Islanders. Well, we have 50,000 Pacific Islanders living in American Samoa on U.S. territory. Their fishing, their historic fishing lands are being ravaged by illegal, unreported, and unregulated Chinese fishing. We don't have a Coast Guard cutter in American Samoa. There's no military or law enforcement presence in American Samoa to protect these Americans. So if you really care about Asians and Pacific Islanders, care about them when they're being attacked by the Chinese and their fishing lands are being destroyed. So there are things that we could immediately do that would cost very little money, but would send a message to the world that, notwithstanding the catastrophe that we've just gone through in this debacle that's taken place in Kabul, that America will lead and that we're going to still stand behind our allies. And so those are the sorts of things that again, to the extent they'd listen to Jake Sullivan or Tony Blinken, these are things Republicans will support you on. These are things that are bipartisan. These are things all of America will get behind as we try and repair the damage that's taken place in the last couple of weeks.
Leader McCarthy, I want to turn to defense spending. Even before this catastrophe, the Biden administration embarked on a below-inflation defense spending bill, which would have actually resulted in real cuts in amount of defense spending. At the same time that in the last year, President Trump, $2 trillion was spent on COVID. In the first month of President Biden, another $2 trillion was spent on allegedly COVID relief. Now there's $5 trillion more. It's an astonishing amount of money, none of it for defense. What are you going to tell your colleagues about defense spending?
Well, we're debating the NDAA right now, and the Republicans there are increasing it. You got to keep up with inflation, but remember, the last time Biden was in the White House, they cut it drastically, and we've been building it back under President Trump. What Ambassador O'Brien just talked about, we now have our own allies questioning us, the UK criticizing us. I've talked to a number of ambassadors who've told us they can't trust us anymore. We've watched what China has said to Taiwan, that America will not be there for you. We watched what Putin from the Baltics, Eastern Europe. They feel an opportunity. They feel a void when they feel weakness, and they took advantage of it. When America asked OPEC to produce more oil and cuts a pipeline in America but gives Russia another one. They watched how we handled ransomware. They watched how we dealt with this. So the days forward are going to be more difficult. A clear message for us would be peace through strength that we did. Peace without freedom is meaningless. What we have to do is not only keep up with inflation, we watched what China has done. China has watched how America fought war. After the Desert Storm, they watched we bring an aircraft carrier 250 miles from you, and we could have air superiority. So they develop a missile to sink aircraft carriers. But now they build islands. They lied to President Obama and said they wouldn't weaponize them, but they pushed us further around and weaponized them. They watch that we use GPS, so they spend a lot of time in space. You know, they've landed on the moon. They've landed on the dark side. We haven't landed on the dark side before. It's difficult. And now they spend a lot of time not just stealing, but building a military. And now they're telling our allies that we won't be there for them. So people question that. It won't just be our allies question it. What about the American men and women who are working in foreign service and somewhere else? To say, this is what you did when you promised 2 weeks prior you would not leave, but you did? It puts doubt in a lot of people's minds, which makes it more difficult to do your job. So Congress, being a co-equal branch, should say, we're going to lead. We're going to have oversight. And we're not going to let Nancy Pelosi pick and choose which Republicans could be on the committee. We have military women and men who have served, who understand what is needed. We work with and we build the military that we need. We pivot to the places that we need to push back on. But this $5 trillion is going to break. China and Russia watch that we are going to be weaker in a position to defend ourselves, and the future generations are going to have less opportunity to solve the debt that they created.
Ambassador,
Let me just jump in one thing on one issue. The Global Times, which is the mouthpiece of the Chinese Communist Party, came out with an editorial aimed at the people of Taiwan. And it said, for the folks in Taipei, look at Kabul. This is your future. When we invade and China forcibly coerces you back into a communist state and ends your democracy, the Americans will not be there. They will not show up. Look at what they've done to their Afghan allies. This is your future, Taipei. This is your future, Taiwan. That's a devastating message, and we have to push back on that immediately.
It wasn't just them. Russia says we hump them and dump them in the process. This comes from RTV.
I want to talk to you about the intelligence capacity. My colleague at the Washington Post, Mark Thiessen, quoted the Wall Street Journal this morning as saying 90% of our intelligence gathering capability in Afghanistan has been lost. He used to get a daily brief, used to give the president a daily brief. What does that mean in real terms for what we can see in our over-the-horizon capabilities to deter al-Qaeda, which is already back, and we've seen the pictures of Osama bin Laden's head of security. Zawahiri will show up pretty soon. What's it mean for our ability to actually execute, even if we've got over-the-horizon capabilities on the correct target? We've seen the tragedy of bad targeting.
Look, one of the reasons we were able to get Osama bin Laden, and I give President Obama credit for that. President Biden was against that operation, but President Obama authorized that operation, is because we had troops in Afghanistan, and we were able to launch from there to effectuate that successful mission. Look, we have capability. We're going to have some insight into what's happening in Afghanistan. I'm not going to get into the methods of it, but we do have some capability, and we've got some long-range strike capability. But it's incredibly difficult. The hours it takes to fly either an unmanned or a manned mission from the Gulf to Afghanistan is extensive. So, you know, in that time period, targets can move, hostages can be moved if you're trying to rescue them. High-value targets that you want to bring justice to can move. Where you're talking 5, 6, 7 hours to get from the time that the intelligence is collected to being able to execute a strike. So it's much more difficult to engage in counterterrorism from far over the horizon. We're not next door in Pakistan. We're not next door in Iran. We're not next door in China. We're not next door in the stands, because President Putin made it very clear to Tajikistan and Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan not to host American troops to monitor the situation in Afghanistan there. So we're operating from, it's the tyranny of distance. We're operating from far away. And the other thing that does is that puts our men and women in uniform at extreme risk. It's very hard to operate at that distance over the horizon. If you're sending a bomber or a jet in, you probably don't have search and rescue capability if the pilot has to bail out or the aircraft is hit by an anti-aircraft missile. So it complicates the situation for either CT or for hostage rescue dramatically, not having access to Bagram Air Base. It puts us in a difficult situation.
Think of the proximity. You're close to Russia, China, Pakistan. You now have nothing on the ground. If you go to surveil, you got to fly for hours before you get there. So you have less time overhead. You got to react fast. And then the question becomes the human intelligence gathering. We've just built up 20 years of a relationship that was just broken in the last month. I imagine they're more upset with us than probably the Taliban are too.
Leader, Ambassador O'Brien is always very careful not to criticize Secretary Blinken or NSA, Jake Sullivan by name, or members of the military by name. But I know that members of the military their morale is very low. I had a Gold Star father, a veteran, call, mentioned his son, Staff Sergeant Robert Miller, 2 days ago from Orlando. I looked it up. Robert Miller is a Medal of Honor recipient for Special Operations Valor, saved his captain and his troops in Afghanistan in 2009, and he is shattered. Lots of people are saying, what did we fight for? I think they did a great service in getting hundreds of thousands of people 20 years of freedom and keeping us safe. But what do you do about the military right now when morale is shot?
You know, we've watched the number of suicides, but if you take the hotlines for the veterans, increased drastically in the last month. I serve with a lot of veterans from Afghanistan and Iraq. I was just with Dan Crenshaw yesterday. He lost his eye. He said the last time he was in Afghanistan, he was blind, but he could still hear. And it's just with the emotion, or Brian Mass gets up who lost both his legs and some fingers. I've watched the turmoil for them. Dan will tell you this. For anyone who says we just ended the war, we did not. You just lost a strategic position to help fight it. These people still hate us. They hate our way of life. But now that we departed, we're in a weaker position. But militarily, they're stronger because we just gave them weaponry, and the administration won't even give them the accountability. That's why when I talk to every single veteran, I know what you're probably going through right now and what you're watching. We need to reach out to them. We need them to know they did a job well done. They were successful. We were not attacked for 20 years because of what they accomplished. They did exactly what people have asked. And so when we go back and get the accounting of this, I don't know this to be true, but it sure seems to me the State Department took over, and the military takes orders. The military didn't decide how many people we needed in Afghanistan. The president did. And they had to determine what best to be able to utilize them.
Can I get you, Ambassador O'Brien, to expand on this, because a lot of people watching and in the audience do not understand chain of command, and you were not part of it, but you advised the president who gives direction to the Secretary of Defense, who gives direction to the combatant commander. What is state's role in the exercise of this catastrophe? What happened here? I know you don't like to criticize Secretary Blinken or Jake Sullivan, but where was the fail?
You know, it's hard to know, and that's why you're going to have some oversight. And what I've said over the past couple of weeks is there's going to be a lot of time in Washington for the blame game, and we're going to find out what happened, who made the decisions, who made recommendations to the president. But look, I think President Biden, I think you have to take him at his word. At the end of the day, the buck stops with President Biden. He said that, notwithstanding him blaming other folks, whether it's President Trump or President Ghani or Afghan forces or whoever he's blaming. At the end of his speeches, he always says the buck stops with him. And so he's got to be, he's the one who's accountable for it. But at the end of the day, it's the President of the United States that tells with advice from the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs and General Milley's an advisor. He's not a line commander. With the advice of Jake Sullivan, who again is a staffer, as a national security advisor, not a line commander. The President of the United States tells the Secretary of Defense how many troops will be there, and then the Secretary of Defense orders the combatant commander, in this case General McKenzie at CENTCOM, how many troops will be in Afghanistan. As far as the State Department, it does seem that this mission was turned over from the military to state, and when we got down to 600 troops, which was maybe enough, probably not, to secure just the embassy alone, it became a State Department operation. When President Trump left office, when we left office, there were 2,500 American troops in Afghanistan. There were 5,000 NATO troops, because one of the things President Trump insisted on with our allies is that there be burden sharing. that the United States not carry the whole burden of these interventions on our own. So we had 7,500 troops. That was enough to protect our counterterrorism operations, to put leverage on the Taliban, to protect the embassy. And if it was decided to do an evacuation of AMCITs, American citizens, our allies, the SIV visa holders, and retrograde our equipment out of Afghanistan, and we controlled Bagram Air Base. Kabul was free and safe. So what you had is you saw a massive deterioration in the security situation in Afghanistan, and then once Bagram was closed and we lost air support, it was only a matter of time at that point that the Afghan army would realize, hey, it's better for us to cut a deal with the Taliban and save ourselves than to continue to fight without air cover. So, you know, I don't know how that decision was made. I don't know why it was made. That's something that I think the committees will find out. But when it went from a military operation to protect and keep Americans safe and to evacuate them if necessary to a State Department operation, you know, something went very wrong there. I mean, the idea that you take your troops out first and then hope the civilians could get out later, you know, you don't have to be a, you know, I think most second lieutenants would tell you that's probably not a good idea. And somehow that was a decision that was made.
You go back, there were two people left in the room when the decision was made, the president and the vice president. The vice president brags about that. When this was all collapsing, you had to work with the State Department, not the military. When the State Department told, and the administration told the military they only had 600 troops, they couldn't keep Bagram then. When Bagram fell, you then told the Afghans that you no longer had air cover, and you left in the middle of the night, so now you question whether you could stay and fight. But you had 5,000 prisoners with ISIS-K and others. Now, free around, and there's new weaponry. You had 600 troops to protect our largest embassy in the world. We spent more than $800 million on this embassy. It's one of the largest. That's gone. But the question raises still to this point, what is the plan to get the Americans out? That's the only question that should be for our nation right now, and that should be our entire focus. But you had a Congress controlled by the Democrats and the Senate. Pelosi has the power as the speaker. They called us back. The UK called back the Parliament, and they worked on getting their citizens out. They only worked on passing about $5 trillion of money that week. And they only allocated us 90 minutes to have a briefing and shut it down, even though people were standing in the rows to ask questions of the secretary and others. We tried to bring up a pro forma of 4 questions. The plan to get us out, the accounting of our weaponry, no cash, and no recognition. And they banged the gavel down as we stood right there on the floor, like we weren't even standing there, like they couldn't see us.
The Morning Consult poll of this morning was conducted from Saturday to Monday, and it's a very well-respected poll, found that 61% of respondents believe the country is on the wrong track. That is a devastating number for the President and the Democrats. This is not a political question, but our constitutional republic leaves it to the people to render a decision on the conduct of national security only every other year. To what extent will this catastrophe figure in the 2022 election? Democrats are hoping that the page is turned. Do you think it will be? And how are you recruiting candidates and urging them to talk about national security in the election cycle ahead?
National security is important. It's the future of where we go. Our economy is important. There's so many issues. Our borders important, the economy, whether we feel safe and secure in our own streets. This administration and this Congress wants to defund our police. There's so many different issues there. I look for people who are willing to serve that show leadership in so many different elements. But it's interesting that some who rise to the top, right? When I look at there, Derek Van Orden, who ran last time against Ron Kind, happened to be a Navy SEAL who served there. Ron Kind now decided to retire. Or Morgan Luttrell, the identical twin brother and Navy SEAL of Marcus Luttrell, just as decorated. Or Jake Elsley, who just got elected in Texas, who flew F-18s. You know who he flew them with off the aircraft carriers in there? Mike Garcia from California. Or Esther Joy King. She served in the military. She's from Illinois, ran against Sherry Bustos, the head of the DCCC last time. Came close to beating her now. Sherry's retiring. Esther went to Afghanistan, actually prior to being in the military, to help Her parents came to visit her. You know what her parents did? This is early in the 2000s. Opened up a school. So you know what they spent the last 2 weeks? Trying to get the kids out of the school. Or you go, Jan Kiggins down in Virginia, who served in the Navy, then became a nurse and in the state senate. I mean, we have these amazing leaders. And when you look at the last election for Congress, Republicans were supposed to lose 15 seats. Everyone said it. They got the number right, the party wrong, right? We elected more women in the last Congress for Republicans than any time in the history. We beat 15 Democrats, and every Democrat lost to a Republican woman or a Republican minority. And you know the very best state for us was California. You know one of the very best places for us was Young Kim right here. So if I was a Democrat, the Republican nominee lost California by 5 million votes. We beat 4 Democrat incumbents. The President Trump lost all 4 districts, 3 of them by double digits. We won in Miami, 2 seats in Miami, Maria Salazar and Carlos Jimenez. Very heavily Democrat seats, but you know what? In that district, there's a lot of people from Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua. They understand freedom and socialism.
If I can go back to refugees, in 1956, President Nixon greeted the Hungarian refugees from the revolution when he was vice president. After the fall of Cuba, we welcomed Cubans. After the fall of Vietnam, we welcomed Vietnamese. After the fall of Iran, the Iranian diaspora came to the United States. The trouble at the border, where no one is being vetted, is going to influence refugee policy towards this catastrophic collapse. Can you keep those 2 issues apart? Because the border is not secure right now. It's a national security threat. But being welcoming to this refugees is in a tradition that is deeply American.
It's deeply American. Remember, I think anyone who worked with us and we made a promise to, we keep that promise. You have to be vetted, though, because of the time and place of how this collapsed. But we have a border that is unsecure. More than 1 million people have already entered illegally this year, 7 months. But the biggest challenge is it wasn't because there's new legislation, it's simply the executive orders and the leadership. And this goes to, remember what Secretary Gates said about President Biden? He's been wrong on most every foreign policy decision for the last 4 decades. But now look at his management. His first major crisis in the administration was the border. He first denied it was a crisis. When it became a crisis, he passed it off to somebody else. We have caught 2 people, that's what you know publicly, that were on the terrorist watch list from Yemen in California, not on the same day and not at the same place. People know how to come here. More than 100 different countries have been entering in the last 7 months through here. Now you have people who are weaponized, who are out of prison, who are in the Middle East, that know how to get here. That's a concern, and that's a focus we should be upon. But we should separate the 2, because it separates who we are as a nation.
Ambassador O'Brien, I want to talk a little bit about the non-availability of President Biden during a crisis. You were in the Oval Office sometimes many times a day, but at Camp David, you always traveled with the President. I've noticed the President is not traveling with a great deal of staff, does not appear to be deeply engaged with his staff when he does so, and is disengaged from the media. You may not have liked President Trump's availability to the media, but it was refreshing. What do you think of President Biden's isolation from questions the American people have?
Well, listen, it's worrisome, and you know, I'm not at the White House. I don't know what kind of briefings the president and the vice president are getting, or how they're being staffed. But there was that one striking photo of the president at Camp David in the big conference room at Camp David. He was sitting alone, and we would have never let the president sit alone. He would have always had myself or my deputy or Secretary Pompeo or Secretary Esper, or later Acting Secretary Miller. In a situation like that, with high stakes, with the credibility of the United States on the line, with American lives and the lives of our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines on the line, the president would always be staffed. He'd have people there to support him, to provide him the information he needed. He looked like he was alone, and I actually felt bad for him that he didn't have people with him. And in fact, when he went back and he came to the White House, I saw when he went back and boarded the helicopter, other than his Secret Service agent, his military aide, and the physician, I didn't see any staff with him on that helicopter ride back. And so I think it's important that the president have the best people around him, that he has the folks with whom he reposes confidence to be there to brief them, but they don't seem to be with them very often, and I think that's a concern. I just want to go back to one thing, and hopefully he's getting the advice. Hopefully he's on the phone a lot with them, and hopefully he's doing secure video teleconferences. I mean, all those things are available. But I'd like to see more staff with the president, making sure. Look, he's our president. He's the president of the United States, and we're going through a heck of a crisis right now. And we've got to keep the president. We've got to keep the leaders in the White House and the leaders in the Pentagon. Whether we disagree with them or not, we've got to keep them in our prayers, because we've got, as Leader McCarthy's pointed out several times, this mission is not over. I mean, we've got hundreds or thousands of Americans, and we've got tens of thousands of our allies that want to get out, that could be subject to kidnapping, to hostage taking, to torture, to death. We need to work on getting them out, and I want to make sure the president gets the best advice and the best staffing he's got that's available to him, and that's something that I think we should all want. On the issue of refugees, I just want to do a shout out to a couple of the red states. I saw Oklahoma and then Governor Cox up in Utah have both come out and said, once the folks are vetted, and look, we don't need people that aren't vetted or we don't know their background, but for the folks that we have biometrics on and we know they worked at the embassy, they were our locally employed staff, our interpreters, those that helped save Americans and fought side by side with us, we need to welcome them here. And by the way, they're going to be great Americans because they know what they're fleeing.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty sad to see somebody so desperate to get out of their country that they're willing to climb into a wheel well of a C-17 and die, or to fall off the wing of an airplane as it takes off because they're so desperate to leave. And for all the Blame America First crowd, and for the people that hate this country and claim that we're, as our UN ambassador did, that our founding documents are weaved with white supremacy and that sort of thing. I don't see people at LAX climbing on the wings of airplanes to fly out of this country, or getting to wheel wells to try and escape to Afghanistan or Cuba or Nicaragua or these socialist paradises. We're the greatest country in the history of the world. We're a great country. I mean, you take a look at, Kevin and myself, we were like middle-class Irish kids from egg cities in California, Santa Rosa and Bakersfield. We've got young Kims from an immigrant family. We've got people in this country that have the opportunities that you wouldn't have anywhere else in the world. And it's a great place. And the one thing I don't want people to get too depressed about, we're going through a tough time, and our adversaries should understand this. We're going through a tough time right now, and our credibility has been shaken, but we've been through tough times before. We saw it after Vietnam. We saw it after the Iran hostage crisis. But don't ever bet against the United States of America, because we're going to be back, and we're still, as Ronald Reagan used to say, the last best hope of mankind on Earth. And I think that's something as depressing as it can get over politics, we got to keep that in mind. And those Afghans who come here and they move to Utah or Oklahoma or Virginia, wherever they're going to live, they're going to become the ones that are fleeing for their lives. They're going to be great Americans. They're going to understand how important it is that liberty and justice for all and individual freedom is. And I think they're going to end up being great Americans, and their kids are going to be great Americans, and we got to welcome them here.
As we're running short on time, I want to finish with a focus on the Chinese Communist Party. Mr. Leader, in the summer of 2020, then Secretary of State Pompeo came to the library to announce a policy of distrust but verify, the culmination of a series of 5 speeches the ambassador gave, one in Phoenix, outlining a new policy towards China. This catastrophe has deeply damaged our ability, as has been mentioned, vis-a-vis the Chinese Communist Party and the defense of Taiwan. The new administration came in, cut off an arms sale. They've subsequently allowed it to happen to Little Sparta, United Arab Emirates, cut off the Saudi Arabian arms sale, have delayed the Taiwan arms sale. Has anybody talked to you from the White House about what we need to do to reestablish the credibility of the deterrent in the Pacific? Indeed, the Ronald Reagan is off Pakistan now, not in the South China Sea. We have to do some things that are very public right away.
As a nation, you want to work together. I'm going to have differences with the administration. But when it comes to putting America in the best footing, we're going to work well together. But they haven't come to us at all. I've reached out numerous times. I literally went to the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi. We're in the 75th anniversary of Normandy. When you walk and you look at those gravestones and you see the ages of the number of Americans who gave their life, and you wonder, what could we have done as a nation prior to that they would not have to die? And looking forward, what could we do that we wouldn't put ourselves in that position again? And I asked, could we put a committee together to deal with China, to look at not just from a military point of view, from an agriculture, from aerospace, from every part of being, and make it an equal number of Republicans and an equal number of Democrats. It took me 8 months. I finally got them to agree. We selected who was going to be on it. We had the Washington Post come in and actually interview to be able to put the article out. And the night before we were going to announce it, they backed away. They backed away. You can't put politics before people. And that's the decision. Our greatest threats going forward is the debt and China. And we've got to be prepared as one to do it. My concern is in this administration is how he's handled crisis. He goes alone. When it becomes a crisis, he puts it off to somebody else. I watched our president during this crisis turn his back and not answer questions. I watched him say the buck stops with him, but he blamed everybody else. I watched that we have Americans sitting over there. Regardless, people make mistakes. Admit your mistake and fix it. That's what we do. And just to blame others is not going to solve the problem. And now you have our allies probably calling China more than they're calling us. If it took one of our closest allies, Boris Johnson, 36 hours to get a return phone call in the middle of the Afghan crisis when he's trying to get citizens out, I imagine China and Russia are saying they'll be there for you.
My very last question for both of you is a practical one, and your experience as hostage envoy will help here, especially Ambassador O'Brien. How much information should the media share about who is trapped in Afghanistan and their status, how they got there, where they are? Is it a danger to them, and does it help us? We knew how many Americans were in the Tehran embassy. We were about to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the return of the POWs from Vietnam. We knew every man who was imprisoned there. What should we know about who is in Afghanistan, in your opinion?
Yeah, my opinion, in a situation like this, it's really up to the families of the hostages and the families of the Americans to decide if they want to go public or not. Generally, in this case, I would not go public because information travels so quickly that the Taliban has excellent access thanks to all the cell towers and networks that we built for Afghanistan. They've got access to the internet the same way you and I do here. They can see everything that's said by the media, so I would keep that quiet. I would keep quiet, the schools from which we're trying to extradite people, the names of specific high-profile potential hostages or Americans or SIVs. And the reason is you don't want to increase their value for the hostage takers or for the regime in Kabul. And look, I had a lot of success with the press. I'll tell you, there were many times that I dealt with in their papers, whether it was New York Times or Washington Post, that were not necessarily friendly to the administration, that had information about where we were with negotiations, where hostages were, what was happening with a potential military operation. And to their credit, every time I contacted the reporter or got back to them and said, hey, this could put the hostage in danger, or this could put the detainee in danger, they acted responsibly. And again, this is a different story. It's a bigger story. You're dealing with thousands of people, so that may be hard to accomplish. But I will give the press credit that when I went to them as the hostage ambassador and asked them not to publish, they almost universally agreed to not publish, and we were able to get a lot of people home. So I think it's better to keep those things quiet unless there's some specific reason that the family wants to publicize it. It may be that somebody's going to be killed by the Taliban or has been taken hostage by ISIS, and by shining a light on that person, it may protect them because they become a bit of an international story, and it becomes harder for the terrorists to execute them or to torture or abuse them. But again, those are difficult individual calls on a case-by-case basis.
I think at the end of the day, we don't say the names of who's there, but if we speak as one nation and say they're all coming home, Taliban will get the message, don't mess with them. The rest of the world will understand too. We're bringing Americans home, and every single one. And we'll do whatever needs to make it happen. You speak with strength, just as we've learned from this museum and others, from those who left our country but led our country before, we'll be okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking the leader and Ambassador O'Brien.